What is going on, you guys? It's your boy, Average Bob, and it's been a while since we've had an episode, since the end of the Giants season. Didn't really do too much playoff stuff, and the reason for that is, we had little baby average girl during the season. There's just losing more and more time, free time. So we're recording this the morning of daylight savings time. We were watching UFC super late last night, UFC 299, which was an amazing card. A lot of great fights, but that's not why the reason you're here is to listen to me talk about UFC. You want to hear about Giants updates. I'm not going to try to edit this as much as possible. I just might remove some clicking as we transition from one topic to the next, because no one wants to hear that. But yeah, no, there's been a lot going on in Giants Nation, so let's get started. First and foremost, Saquon Barkley is likely leaving the Giants this week in free agency, as they didn't give him the franchise tag, and they also didn't come to like a deal or anything that was in the ballpark of what either party wanted. Per the New York Post, it's not necessarily the end of a 6-year union, because there could be some sort of fair offer that Saquon finds if he doesn't find that through free agency. And there's a couple places that Saquon could go. I think, where he's really tied to after the success of CJ Stroud in the Houston Texans offense, that could be a good landing spot for him to make that offense a little bit more versatile. I think I just want to talk about Saquon a little bit, even before I dive into that. And I'm sorry for being a little bit scatterbrained on a few hours of sleep here. But I think the thing is with Saquon, they never really gave him a proper chance to have the career that he really deserved. And, he was offset with injuries and could never really put together a full season, but they didn't really make it easier for him. And teams were easily able to scheme against Saquon. They would stack boxes. They would say, hey, we're going to put everyone in the box and we're going to make Daniel Jones try and beat us, which obviously outside of one season where they eventually got their ass kicked in the playoffs, that scheme has been widely successful and effective. I think the Giants might be getting a little bit smarter now with Joe Schoen to say, listen, let's not keep, what's the definition of insanity, right? Like doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. Maybe the Giants are finally at this breaking point with Saquon and Daniel Jones to say, we need a fresh restart, because what the old regime had kind of built here from an offensive side of the ball really hasn't been wildly successful outside of one, again, season where they did get destroyed by the Eagles in the playoffs. So it's good to see that the Giants kind of notice that. And again, no running backs are getting paid right now. There's Josh Jacobs from the Raiders who's hitting free agency. Tony Pollard's probably hitting free agency again too. Like no one, Derrick Henry. These guys have been around the league for a while now and have been some of the top running backs in the league, including Saquon, and they're not getting offers. The only person who really seems worth it to get a large deal is the one who did get it, Christian McCaffrey. He's on one of the best teams in the league, and he had a great performance in the Super Bowl, but it wasn't enough to obviously get it done against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. It is really unfortunate that injuries and bad offensive schemes and line play really kind of derailed Saquon's career, because it obviously could have been a good one. But again, I think the nature of the sport and the NFL running back position in general has really changed so much to see, you really don't see too many bell cow running backs. So if the Giants' game plan is to get back to what made the Giants successful for those many years, where they were able to win playoff games, were able to win multiple Super Bowls. I think one of the key facts of that was at the running position. They didn't have a one, trick pony. They didn't have one bell cow running back that you knew was going to get the ball over and over and over again. They had a couple different guys. They had Brandon Jacobs. They had Ahmad Bradshaw. They had Derek Ward. They had guys that they were rotating to keep one fresh all season. And two, I think it came down, and they had different styles as well. Like you had a quick, small, flashy back from Ahmad Bradshaw. You also had a big bruiser, Brandon Jacobs, who would just run people over, and you could, there was a healthy combination of diversity in the position instead of someone who, what their skill set is from the years of tape of watching them. And you know what? I love Saquon to death. I still will, and I'm going to root for him. But there's one scenario where I will not be rooting for him, and it will be if he goes to the Philadelphia Eagles. That would just be a disaster scenario for myself as a Giants fan to watch him go there and have success. I do hope he has success wherever he goes, just not in Philadelphia. They're an arch nemesis of mine. I truly hate them. And I'm wondering a little bit more because this has now been said by a couple different folks. If we look at the tweet from Jason Damas here, he believes Saquon Barkley will officially be a Philadelphia Eagle by Wednesday. And if healthy, will have a similar impact to what McCaffrey's was with the 49ers. That's an interesting take, I think, from Dumas, because when you look at what the Eagles were able to do last year, they had, I don't even know what DeAndre Swift's contract is. Is he still going to be on the team? Because they would use him, they would use Kenneth Gainwell. They still had Boston Scott to play the Giants in their back pocket, who'd go off for a touchdown a game, even though he was a little sneaky quiet last year versus the Giants. So maybe he'll bounce back. But besides that, they didn't do a good job of really mitigating their rushing offense. And again, once they get down to the goal line, Jalen Hurts is getting 10-plus rushing touchdowns a year. So where does Saquon fit into that? I don't know. I think, and I did try to talk to a lot of Eagles fans last year, the nice ones. I'm not tooting their horn too much, but I think one thing that you saw in the way that they dropped off the back half of that season so heavily was the criticism of their offense getting away from using DeAndre Swift when he did play well. So I don't know how, they would have to obviously make a lot of changes within their offensive game plan to use Saquon to the best of his ability in some sort of Christian McCaffrey type scenario. But again, the whole situation for me is completely unfathomable, and I don't want it to occur at all. So let's just hope he goes to the Texans and we barely have to see him play unless you're watching Red Zone and him and CJ Stroud are going off every single weekend. And I think there's one last thing I want to end with Saquon. Again, always loved the guy. But this reminds me from a agent perspective what they're doing with Saquon right now. And this is going to hear me out. This might be a little bit of a weird scenario for you to wrap your head around a little bit. But the same thing happened with Ben McAdoo's agent when Ben McAdoo was the offensive coordinator for the Giants, and the Giants were obviously forcing Coughlin to retire. What Ben McAdoo's agent did was there was rumors very similar to what you're seeing from Saquon's camp right now that are saying, oh, the Eagles are very interested. They did the agents did the same thing with Ben McAdoo because it's almost a nightmare scenario. And at the time, guys, I know Ben McAdoo sucks now, and at the time he was kind of looked at as, oh, he had a history with Rodgers. He was kind of, could be like a good heir apparent, had a solid offensive coordinator stewardship. And then if you went to the Eagles and had success there, that would have been sort of a, terrible scenario it made the Giants have to be panic sort of buyers buying McAdoo. Now, I don't think it's necessarily 100% the same case, but I do see the overarching theme between the two. And maybe they're trying to force the Giants' hand a little bit to say, wow, you should pay us before your franchise player and essentially the face of your franchise, in national commercials all over the place could go to your arch nemesis. So you should pay him what we say he deserves. And the Giants aren't bending down from that. So let's see what happens this week. Maybe I'll do a quick reaction video with wherever Saquon signs. And again, hopefully it's anywhere but within the division. And I saw something else that's the Cowboys. That would also be a pukable scenario as a Giants fan if that happens. So fingers crossed it doesn't. Next up was an interesting one that I wasn't really thinking about per se from the beginning, with Darren Waller coming to the Giants and now potentially facing retirement. And he said to Dan Duggan that he was going to make a decision on his future soon, but not ahead of the free agency next week, which is a little annoying because obviously if Darren Waller does retire, we want to be able to sign a potential other tight end while they're still available and unsigned from everyone else in the league. But I did like Daniel Bellinger's rookie season, and last year he was kind of took a back seat when Waller was really playing to the best of his ability when healthy. But I think that's the biggest thing is Darren Waller is pretty much incapable of being healthy. It was really weird too, because going into last season, I had mentioned there are a couple things. One thing I was nervous about was Darren Waller's injuries. And then bang, right before the season starts, you see his questionable status literally everywhere. It's like season hasn't even started yet, and this is where we are. And I think he had mentioned at the time too, he has some sort of like crazy lingering hamstring issues that it's just a lot of lower body stuff for him that just continually not healing, not getting better, and now it's compounding as especially gets into his 30s. And you know what? A guy like Darren Waller, he really doesn't have too much left to prove. He's been the face of a movement of people who were substance abusers. He's also gone across a couple teams, and he was at one point, a top 3 tight end in the NFL. His wife's widely successful and has won multiple WNBA championships. So I think he's trying to weigh all these options in his mind and figure out, do I still want to do this? And is it worth it or fair to the Giants if you're going to come back and play 4 games next year and then just, go on the injured reserve again? So we're going to have to see what he does. I think it's definitely unfair, though, if he's not going to make a decision. Like, if you were to make a decision a month or two from now and say, I'm going to retire, I don't know how he would be looked upon for that decision. It probably wouldn't be kindly because it didn't give us time to figure out something else. But who knows? Maybe the Giants will draft the tight end out of Georgia, Brock Bowers, at 6, and you'll never even think of Darren Waller again or whatever the trade was to get him here. So another free agency rumor that came across the other day or this weekend was that Russell Wilson, this is Adam Schefter reporting, Russell Wilson stopped in New Jersey for an exploratory meeting with the Giants, and then he was meeting with the Steelers. I didn't really understand where Russell Wilson was going to go after his breakup with the Broncos and a tumultuous relationship there where Broncos country, let's ride. Like, it was just a terrible overall experience for them, and they never were able to have any success. I think it was year 1 was a coaching problem. Year 2 was like, I don't know. There was just so much money going to him. It was such a bad trade by the Broncos. But the Broncos are like always a historically like weirdly needy quarterback team because of guys like history like John Elway, and like the Colts are a little bit like that too, where they're always looking for a quick fix for like a crazy scenario, and they'll always overpay for it. And honestly, guys, like I think there were rumors too that said previously before all of this that the Giants were interested in bringing in a veteran quarterback to compete with Jones outside of Tyrod Taylor, and then like Tommy Cutlets, like he ain't gonna play much next year unless like ravaged by injuries again, which could be a very plausible scenario if the Giants don't address their offensive line and kind of hope people get better at this point. But that's also something else we could talk about when they bring in other people through free agency. But let's just talk about Russell Wilson, right? He's at a weird point of his career and is entering, mid-30s at this point. With the Giants, like he would be running around for his life. Can he withstand the injuries? I mean, I don't really think he's missed much time for injuries at all in his career, which is kudos to him because he seems to always get his ass kicked when you watch him play. But I think, if the Giants didn't have to pay much for him and he could compete with a Daniel Jones coming in back from an ACL injury, I mean, that's the scenario. Is Joe Schoen going to take egg on his face and say, I don't want to see any more of Daniel Jones, which is another thing Rich Eisen was saying. The Giants are done with Jones, and that was one thing that his source was saying about being at the NFL Combine last weekend. So if that's the case and the Giants are done with Jones and they might want to draft a quarterback, or they want to draft a quarterback that could wait for a year behind a proven NFL caliber leader, like someone like Russell Wilson, then it could be a plausible scenario. And because you don't have to pay Russell Wilson right now because the Broncos owe him a truckload of cash. Maybe they would have to take on some of the contract. I'm sure the details are somewhere. I don't have them in front of me here, but it doesn't seem like they would owe him much money at all for him to come here and play, which makes sense of why he's going to visit with the Steelers. I mean, the Steelers could be probably a pretty good situation for him to go into and have some success, maybe a little bit more opposed to the Giants, because I think the Steelers have honestly better coaching, to be completely honest with you. Another person who will not be coming back in free agency, who is a free agent, we did not franchise tag, was safety Xavier McKinney. He's had an Iron Man streak, and he has had some pretty strong success with the Giants in playing so many games. And I think, in the NFL, availability to play is such a huge factor. And being serviceable. I think he was pretty serviceable. He was, he had a couple good years with us. I mean, outside of the ATV accident, which was pretty mind-numbing because, the Giants were actually having a good season. But I think there was a lot of weird beef between him and Wink Martindale as well, where he's like, I don't want to come back and play for him. And I think you saw that specifically, if you guys remember early on, in October when the Giants played the Dolphins, the Giants were running like man-to-man with Tyreek Hill, and they had rookies doing it. Trey Hawkins and Deonte Banks are getting cooked by Tyreek Hill, even though McKinney's just playing center of field, not covering anyone. And after the game, he was actually asked that by beat reporters where he's like, you don't know the scheme. You don't know what I'm talking. Like, I did my job. It's like, he does seem to have a pretty shitty attitude, I think. And especially when you're getting cooked game after game, like, and I don't think the defense necessarily was the biggest problem, but I don't see a scenario when the Giants are clearly rebuilding and trying to figure out their identity where you should be paying high money for a safety. It just doesn't make sense to us. And to me, I don't think it makes sense to the Giants as well, which is why you saw someone like Julian Love leave last year, right? Julian Love was pretty successful and had gotten so much better as a Giant. And they said, we're not going to pay you. Go to the Seahawks. And he looked pretty decent for the Seahawks in the random games that I saw from them. So I'm not going to lose any sleep about losing Xavier McKinney in free agency, and I don't think you should either. Another cap hit from R.A. Marayev is Mark Lewinsky at guard, clearing $5.6 million in space. The 9-year veteran started at 19 games in 2 years with the Giants. I mean, I think Glowinski was also part of the problem for the Giants' offensive line. Obviously, he is because he started 19 games, and even in games he didn't start, I feel like he got a lot of burn playing for other guys that either sucked or got hurt. So I'm fine to put this in the past. I believe Glowinski was a Bills guy, so had the familiarity with Shane and Dable, and they said, let's just bring him in. He's our guy. Maybe he's the fucking man in person, like he easily could be. But I think his play on the field has also soured with the Giants to say, let's put a lot of this stuff behind us and move forward finally and with a fresh start. Because I think if, in terms of Jones and Saquon, if Shane and Dable continue to do that stuff and not move on and change the identity and move forward and create a new identity that's theirs, they'll also be on the chopping block too. And honestly, with next year, how Vegas views the Giants and how I personally view the Giants as well, it could be sooner than later if the Giants have like a real abysmal season, which I don't know. Which also, let's talk about some draft rumors. Oh man, with the Giants have the 6th pick, let's talk about the good draft rumor, right? And I know we need an offensive line, guys, but if we don't have the proper coach to develop these guys, because clearly the guys that we've developed and worked with in the past never really pan out that well. Andrew Thomas is good, but he was hurt the majority of last season. So he's going to have a huge bounce back here. But the pros of a fun rumor or the guys that the Giants have met with, let's talk about something that the Giants have desperately needed for quite some time right now. Since probably Odell left, is a wide receiver number 1. There's 3 names specifically that the Giants met with yesterday: Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors from LSU, and Romeo Odunze from Washington. All 3 of these guys are great. I feel like I actually saw them all play a decent amount of college football last year, which was like, I guess I was just sitting around with the baby on Saturday, so I'll just watch football while feeding her and all that stuff. So Marvin Harrison Jr., absolute certifiable stud, could be an NFL great. A lot of hype, also great name and genealogy. Malik Neighbors is one that's really been linked to the Giants, and I don't see this really anywhere else. But do people refer to LSU as wide receiver U? Because they definitely should. When you look at guys have come out from LSU, over the last give or take a decade now, right? Where you had LSU. Sorry, you had Odell Beckham Jr., you had Landry, then you had Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. You have high-level players at the wide receiver position coming from LSU. and Malik Neighbors will be that next one. And, the Giants have had that familiarity with LSU guys. So, and if they think he is the sixth best player available and you can get a wide receiver one, then I think you do it, because that kind of changes the dynamic of the offense a little bit, because and I did a breakdown, if you go back and watch my thoughts on the Giants wide receiver room, which is way more in depth about the detail I'm going to go into right now, but it's not very good. There aren't many threats, and it took about 14 games to get Wan'Dale Robinson going after the season before where he tore his ACL. And last but not least, Dunze, what I call him, Romeo? I think it's just Rome. Is it? I feel like it might be Romeo. I don't know. I gotta look again. Duggan might have a misspelling in there, or maybe I am. I don't know. Either way, Dunze had a very successful career at Washington, and he put on a show in pretty much every game he was at with Michael Penix Jr. So, I don't know if he'd be the pick if you would want to take a Dunze over Joe Alt, or I think Fashanu was banged up a little bit at the combine, but over a quarterback or tackle. I think if Harrison Jr. or Neighbors is there, I'm completely fine with it. And I want to see what you guys think about drafting a wide receiver, or what you guys want to see at 6, because if there's any feedback or comments, let me know, and I'll definitely touch on it in the next video that I do, and kind of cater to what you guys want to see. And then, of course, talking about quarterbacks, and right now in Vegas, it looks like the Giants are the odds-on favorite to draft J.J. McCarthy out of Michigan at plus 500. Guys, I don't know. I've been watching football a long time. I don't like J.J. McCarthy. I want to be on the record of stating that now. I will be very upset if J.J. McCarthy is drafted 6 overall. Hopefully, if they do draft it 5 years from now, you could clip this and say, what an idiot fucking fan. He didn't know shit. That's perfectly fine if he's good and the Giants win the Super Bowl. I don't care. But I think J.J. McCarthy's skill set is that he's a very game manager. He's not making people better. I think when you look at it in the NFL, in college, let's talk about his running back, Blake Corum, for example. Blake Corum had I think maybe over 1,500 rushing yards, even closer to 2,000. I don't have the stats in front of me. Maybe I'll just take a screenshot after this when I'm editing it and put them in here. And over 20-something touchdowns. Blake Corum was that offense. He was that team. I would love to draft him in later rounds, to be completely honest with you, to backfill for Saquon if he leaves, because Blake Corum's a fucking stud running back who will be good at this level. He proved it throughout his entire college career. He will be that in the NFL. Now, he doesn't have to be bell cow like Saquon, but in a rotation, he'll be 100% serviceable. And in Michigan, he was a cheat code. He was unstoppable. And when you could run like that in an offense like that, stuff's open downfield. And J.J. McCarthy wasn't always making those throws. But he does have the pedigree of winning. I was listening to a friend of mine was you should listen to Boomer and Gio on WFAN, because it sounds like they're actually trolling you with this take where Giannotti is talking about how much John Mara, he's here hurting corners, that John Mara absolutely loves J.J. McCarthy, and it's just sickening to me. I felt like I was being personally trolled, and honestly, I don't want it at all. I'd rather Russell Wilson and draft Neighbors than draft J.J. McCarthy at 6, to be completely honest with you. So with that, maybe we'll talk a little bit closer about draft stuff once we start approaching that. But I just want to end with one thing, because I did talk about how much I hate the Eagles, but I did want to talk very quickly about Jason Kelce retiring, because he played the game the right way. He was, just an absolute cornerstone of that Eagles offense for a long time. And obviously he got a lot of FaceTime. Him and his brother have a great podcast and stuff, and they were two of the best players in the league. But I think Jason Kelce, embodies such an undertale story that doesn't really get told too often, especially for offensive linemen. And if you haven't watched the documentary about him and his kind of his last season or 2 seasons ago now with the Eagles when he's contemplating retirement. I think it showed a good glimpse into like underdog mentality and also like what happens to guys when they're getting to the end of their careers and their bodies aren't reacting to the way that they used to. Like, the mental stuff that goes through all of that all of these guys have to face at some point is kind of interesting to really see. And but just have the ultimate respect for that guy, and I hopefully we can get some guys that kind of embody that underdog dog mentality, and that could be defining cultural moments for your team that other guys buy into and build around, and guys that could become legends. The Giants haven't had that in quite some time, so I'm hoping maybe through the draft this year or other guys stepping up, we can get back. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. Sorry I was kind of all over the place a little bit. I haven't done a video like this or a podcast like this in a while, but I did have some fun doing it, and I've been just like in the shower all week with my thoughts, being like, I need time to do this. I need time to do this. So what better time than the present, losing an hour after, going to bed at 2 a.m. after UFC 299. Anyway, let me know what you guys think, and have a great rest of your day, rest of your weekend. And yeah, let's talk hopefully in the middle of next week and do another episode where we could really dive into some free agency guys that we signed through free agency, because when Saquon probably will sign with the Texans on Wednesday. If it's the Eagles, that'd probably be a pretty good reaction video of mine if I do it real quick, because I might not even want to record that because you might hear some really bad words. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. Have a great rest of your day and great start to your week.